the reason we were out in L.A. is that we got a job out in L.A. with ABC, what was then ABC Records, as staff songwriters, and we got the band together out there. So, and I think that the fact that we were, exiled from New York to Los Angeles, I think it did provide a lot of material for the songs, and also a general sort of a psychological ambiance.
It heightened our, our delusions, our persecution delusions to a new all-time high.
It's kind of, Salvador Dali used to talk about a method he had of painting where he would, before he painted a picture, he would have to get himself into this ultra-paranoid state, which he called the paranoid critical method. And I think that's probably what we were forced into using at that time.
Right.
I've seen a couple of, I'd say two general attitudes by musicians toward assembling career retrospectives. Either an uncomfortable loathing or a sincere desire to represent the body of work. How did you two approach the Citizen Steely Dan box set?
I think a kind of perfect combination. We cut it right down the middle there. We reconciled the seeming discrepancies between sincere desire to set the record straight and loathing, outright self-loathing. We actually, the MCA, who owns all the Steely Dan masters, wanted to do the box set for quite a while. We persuaded them to hold off until after Donald's album was out, so that it wouldn't, interfere with the marketing push for that. And so while we were waiting, we gathered together all of the little scraps and tidbits in the package there, and wrote the little liner notes and got all the tunes remastered and so on. And that was actually during the tour last summer, so we were kind of doing it in transit, as it were.
Yeah, I was fascinated that the booklet that accompanies the music actually starts off with what looks like a faxed letter. Is that real?
Yes, that was a letter to our friend Andy McKay over at MCA, who was supervising the assemblage of the material and so on.
I had to ask if it was real because you are the guys who anonymously reviewed your own album once and printed on the back cover, right?
You betcha.
Yeah, I guess we did do that. Andy McKay asked me if we were kidding too when he got the
really?
When he got the letter. Yeah, he said, you guys are kidding with this letter, right?
You must be kidding.
He said,
I said no.
I'd like a response from each of you, if you could. Which albums hold up best over time for each of you, and why?
Well, I think they hold up equally well. I use them for drink coasters, and I trade them in at the local used record store, and they seem to be just as glad to get, one as the other.
Which one would you love to step back in time and do over Walter?
Well, that's an easy question, Redbeard.
Yeah, right. I say none of the above on that one.
None albums is the... I don't think I don't really see any reason to think that you could go back and do anything better or do it again and enjoy it the way you did the first time.
Donald, which albums hold up best for you over time?
Well, I actually don't get that much of an occasion to hear them. I think if I was going to say generally, some of the later ones, I think more than the earlier ones, because, I guess I think of the earlier ones as some sort of juvenilia of some sort. But I think the earlier ones hold up very well as juvenilia.
Wasn't he that guy that used to pitch for the...
Yeah, Ray Juvenilia?
Hector Juvenilia, I was thinking of. Chicago, wasn't it?
Maybe Ray was his brother, the hockey player.
That could have been.
Steely Dan set the benchmark for recorded sound as well as musicianship. However, the market was flooded with inferior Steely Dan CDs until recently. How can a consumer be assured of buying the correctly remastered version of Steely Dan music?
They have a sticker on them that says correctly remastered.
Really?
No, they say digitally remastered by the artist or something like that.
Yeah. The CDs that were really not copied from the right tapes. Shouldn't be in the stores anymore. So
evidently, some of what happened was you always have digital and analog copies of everything you do in storage, and archivally stored. And when it came time to run off a new set of Steely Dan pressings, evidently, I guess that's mostly the responsibility of the janitorial staff over at the record company.
Well, it's not too far. That's not too far from the
Gus, the custodial engineer, inadvertently picked up the...
they wanted a recording engineer, but they got the custodial
engineer, and he picked up the analog copy, the one that said "do not use" for mastering all over it, and he sent that down to the mastering house, and so for a while there were some less than optimum Steely Dan CDs out there, but I think those have all been recalled and ritually destroyed in the correct,
We had a big bonfire.
We melted them down into a...
Ever try putting a CD in a microwave oven?
No, I haven't tried it yet.
It's a thrill.
Donald,
that's where the real superiority of digital starts to show itself, because you could never fit a phonograph record
into a microwave. That's a really good point. I never thought of that.
Don't try this at home.
Welcome back to the Steely Dan Tour radio special on the Album Network. I'm Walter Becker of Steely Dan with Redbeard.
When we talked individually in the summer of 1990, each one of you individually downplayed the cessation of touring in '74 and the lack thereof until recently. But in the box set, the Citizen Steely Dan essays in the booklet, really, you kind of self-consciously allow much to be made of the return to live performance. Is this conveniently self-serving, or have you really had a change of heart regarding making your music in front of Steely Dan fans?
Again, I think both.
Both change of heart, and what's really changed more than anything else is the situation we're in. Which back when we were touring in the early '70s, it was a very the quality of the performances was extremely uneven and unpredictable from night to night. We were barely making enough money to go out and actually do it at all.
Technically, the sound was,
Yeah, it was a drag. There were a lot of things going on that made it not very much fun to do, and you couldn't really be confident that you were going to put on good shows, and acquit yourself well.
We had to open for Sha Na Na.
Wow.
We did open for Sha Na Na.
Wow.
That was a weird triple bill. It was Chuck Berry, Sha Na Na, and Steely Dan.
Actually, I like that one.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Well, it was, but I mean, you have to wonder who put that one together. Was there some mistake, whether they'd gotten us mistaken us for some other band,
or maybe
opening for Slade was really
Slade.
That was an honor.
So, what were your concerns initially when you decided to make the big leap almost 19, 20 years later? What were your initial concerns about taking it out?
I think one of the concerns was we didn't want to be seen as a nostalgia band, and so we got the kind of players we knew would add something to the tunes. We tried to change the arrangements a bit of some of the old tunes so we'd have some fun playing them. And of course, I think one thing was automatic in keeping it away from the nostalgia thing is that we, because we hadn't been on the road in so many years, most of the tunes we were doing had never been played live, so we were essentially approaching, a new bunch of tunes that we'd never really worked with before, and that was really part of it.
When you were making such masterpieces as Asia, how did you ensure that it would remain timeless in a fickle pop culture? Popularity and taste.
Yeah, how did we do that?
How did you do that? Well, popularity and taste are moving targets.
That they keep printing up the CDs right up to the present time. So far it's timeless. But we'll have to see.
I think one of the things that Donald and I tried to do when we were putting together the album, since we were, judging from the way other people's albums sound over the years, I'm forced to conclude that they often have a real shortage of songs, and have to make do with whatever ones they're able to come up with by the time to start the album. But Donald and I we did have plenty of songs. We were able to write songs fairly easily, and so I think the main thing that we did was try to pick songs that really were good and had some lasting structural worthiness.
It's called the no filler concept.
Here's an intriguing quote from Walter. Quote, "We thought superimposing jazz harmonies on pop songs was subversive in a much more subtle way." Walter, can you expand on that? That's an interesting quote.
I'd like to know in a more subtle way than what.
Yeah, what did you mean by that?
We have to hear the...
Yeah.
Could you have the court reporter...
It was out of context, I think.
Well, I think in the late 60s and 70s, the pop musical consciousness was very antithetical to jazz. There was none of the kind of harmonic devices and so on, and the kind of concise, exciting solo work that you associate with jazz was sorely missing, we thought, from the pop music scene. And that was the kind of the songs that we had been writing basically included a lot of harmonic elements from jazz, and lyrically included elements from other genres, and from various black humor, literary sources that we were influenced by. So it seemed that if we could sneak a few of those things into the context of those times, that would be a somewhat subversive sort of thing to do.
And of course, at the time, it was not only a subversion of the sort of folk and blues derived popular music, but also it also subverted jazz as well, since we were using the harmonic sophistication of jazz and putting this big dumb backbeat to it.
Walter, when did you move to Hawaii?
Let's see. I think I moved to Hawaii around 1981.
Besides the obvious desire to live in a tropical paradise, why so far from New York and L.A., the music business meccas, at that time?
Well, I think I ended up there partially because of the contrast to living in New York or L.A. It was having spent as much time as I had living in those two places. When I went to Hawaii for a vacation, it looked like whole other world and a whole other kind of life to spend time there, and that's what I ended up doing.
You think it was, looking back on it now, could it have been a little more than just geography? I mean, could it have been, in a way, trying to kind of distance yourself from the music business, almost in a geographical sense, by going halfway around the world?
Well, for me, it was more of a change of lifestyle. I had no, as that guy on Saturday Night Live used to say in another context, the music business had been very, very good to me, and I had no gripe with it. But I did feel a powerful attraction to spending a few minutes of the day out of doors. And that was a much more interesting proposition in Hawaii than it had been in New York.
I think, though, there is a trend towards a media flight, lately.
Now, where would you go to flee the media, just for...
That's the problem. See, people think...
My curiosity.
Media flight is, a tough proposition these days, since,
Everywhere you go, there's Japanese cars and American radios, American rock and roll.
Welcome back to the Steely Dan Tour radio special on the Album Network. I'm Donald Fagen of Steely Dan with Redbeard.
Now, when did you realize that Steely Dan had acquired a certain mystery that really has maintained to this day? When did you realize it?
I just realized that now.
Oh, come on.
Well, if you read, the music media, there started to be this sort of thing about, this mystique. I really think it really had to do with the fact that we stopped touring, and no one would ever see us, and yet we'd continue to put out records that sold well. So, that was about it, really.
Your countenance never appeared on any Steely Dan album covers, on the fronts anyway, and
there's a good reason for that.
And why is that, guys?
I can't remember somebody we knew or said, some critic once early on when we first started playing said, it was with the ugliest band they'd ever seen.
How do you think Steely Dan would fare breaking into the business in this MTV video era?
No chance.
Not a chance in hell.
Nah.
Nah, we'd have to work in a bookstore.
We'd be out of luck.
Now, you're both bright boys, so one of the few criticisms by the late 70s.
Not according to my biology teacher, Mr. B. Muller, in high school.
Did he flunk you?
Almost.
Oh,
a lot of tap dancing now.
Yeah. One of the few criticisms that ever I think stuck was that you were maybe too clever, too lyrically coy. This was in the late 70s. But in my lengthy conversations, particularly with Walter, I've always heard really sincere humility. What devices do you employ to kind of keep each other grounded?
Sincere humility is the one I use the most.
In what way are you using the word grounded?
Electrically.
Electrically. Well, there's lightning rods on the ends of our glasses.
Donald has a alligator clip which goes from his.
Yeah. You know what it is? It's those 3 prongs. You got to have a third prong.
That's the third prong, yeah. Exactly.
Guess what my next question was? How about humor? Your collective sense.
No place for it.
No place for it. You're too serious, right?
We have a serious message to deliver, and we can't jeopardize our ability to deliver that with some silly jokes.
Is it safe to say that you guys are your own toughest critics when it comes to listening back to the tracks in the can?
Let's hope so. You're probably right about that, and we're going to keep it that way, too.
Okay. It's worked. It's always worked for you. That's right.
Yeah,
When the going gets tough.
Although we did have that great instrumental tune from the club in Boston. You remember that one, Donald, from about 1971 or 72? We had an instrumental piece that we were thinking of including on in one of the greatest hits package that was really, it was like a cassette recording, from somebody's table, but we decided against it.
What's the future hold for Steely Dan? Can you look past recording the next live shows? Is there anything you can let us in on?
Phil, bring me my yarrow stalks, would you? I want to do one of those divinations that I do,
It's true we may be, smart guys, but, the future, forget it.
I think, as was recently put on one of the, if I may paraphrase, one of the television's greatest heroes of the day, I'm pretty cool, Redbeard, but I can't change the future.
Then again, there's the famous line from Heinlein, which is, "There's no time like the future to get something done."
There you go. I like that one. That's good. Mm-hmm. So, as you continue to toy with me here, are there any plans at all past this tour as Steely Dan, or are you just leaving it open-ended, or what?
I'm going to say open-ended on that one.
Let's
because,
say open-ended.
Yeah. Just because in the past, when we've had some little scheme that we were hatching and we prematurely started talking about it, it turned out never to happen. So I'm thinking this time we're just going to say open-ended.
Discretion is.
I guess you can probably we could probably say that we'll be spending time in the studio both together and by ourselves doing various projects, but. It's really as far as we can go.
Well, that's good. That leaves the door open for the future.
And I would say that Donald and I are working on some chant music, some monophonic chant music. We have a piece that we've been discussing.
I think that's already been done. I think that's already been done.
That's been done?
I think the chanting monks thing is, I think that's been done.
Yeah. No, this is a whole other thing, though.
Well, screw
this is a different thing.
We had what we thought was a pretty damn interesting text that we thought was going to justify the writing a piece of this type. But I've already said too much.
Hi, this is Donald Fagen of Steely Dan.
And I'm Walter Becker with the Steely Dan Tour Radio Special on the Album Network.
Let's talk about Walter's new solo album. Okay, what's the title of Walter's new album?
The album's called 11 Tracks of Whack.
11 tracks of whack?
Of whack, yeah.
Of whack, yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Now, it also might interest you to know that there are, in fact, 12 tracks on the album.
You know, we noticed that, too.
Mm.
So you guys are great musicians, but you'll never be accountants.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
No, I don't. It's not really true. In other words, if you call an album 11 tracks of whack and there's 12 tracks, I think there's an obvious conclusion to be made.
That one of the tracks may not be whacking?
Correct.
Got it. So who did what? You guys interchanged so much. Where did you record it? And Donald, what was your role in Walter's 11 Tracks of Whack solo album?
Well, I was sort of, there in the studio sporadically whenever I needed a dose of, sun and surf in Hawaii. I'd, get a, Walter would stake me to a free ticket, and, I'd make believe I was working for, a month or two, and then I'd come home.
Make believe you were working. When will this be available, Walter, the new album, 11 Tracks of Whack?
I think right at the end of September, last week of September.
Excellent.